Welcome one and all to Southtown, a place where rising crime star Geese Howard invites you to the King of Fighters tournament. So load up on pot noodles, dry roasted peanuts, fizzy drinks and broccoli as you prepare to enter the Art of Farting 2. Art of Fighting 2 is the sequel to Art of Fighting, which was released in 1992. And with this game, SNK went all out and kept a lot of the same stuff from its predecessor. Big sprites, big fights, and big action. But this time around, they also made a few tweaks to the fighting system that in all honesty make Art of Fighting 2 one of the toughest versus fighters on the planet. The spirit system is now officially called the Rage Gauge, which limits the use and effectiveness of special attacks. This time the bonus stages are reworked. To increase the Rage Gauge, the player's character has to chop down a tree with one punch to increase the maximum health meter. The player's character must then defeat a number of punks under a certain time limit, and the Initiate Super Death Blow stage has now been adapted for each character's super special move. The main improvement over the original is in the available roster for the single player mode. There are now 12 characters for the player to choose from, which now means when you have a versus battle, you don't have to change your character after your victory. Something that had to be done in the original if you chose a character that wasn't Ryo or Robert. For the new characters, SNK were unable to connect them to the story, so that meant they had more freedom in designing them. The idea was to make clashy and cool designs like Kasaragi and Tenshin. Balancing them was the most difficult task. As the first game, the staff were trying to pursue an interesting story, which necessarily meant more emphasis on the CPU battles. Art of Fighting 2 was meant to be more of the King of Fighters style fighting tournament game. To that end, they intended for the versus play to be more important this time, which is kind of odd. In the original, the versus mode allowed for every fighter to be selected, and in my opinion this showed that the two-player mode was given more importance than the single-player mode, but that is just my opinion. When playing Art of Fighting 2, the controls can feel quite cumbersome at first, especially if you are used to Street Fighter 2. Some of the moves have you moving the directions in 180 degree motion and then side to side all in one go, and what you find is that the direction starts at like 4 or 5 o'clock, not 3 or 6 or 9, which is how it was set up in Street Fighter 2. And with these more complex joystick inputs, I did struggle to get used to it, and it wasn't something I quickly picked up when returning to play it for this video. Another thing about the gameplay that is important to mention is the difficulty. The single player campaign is brutally hard, especially when you can't pull off a lot of the moves easily. The game punishes the sloppy and lazy player and is not very forgiving, and I think this difficulty put a lot of gamers off from playing it. The Rage Gauge adds an interesting element of strategy in this game. The gauge will reduce every time you execute a special move, and so each time one of these moves is performed, it does less damage each time, meaning you have to be careful when and how you use them. You can replenish the gauge during a fight, but this leaves your fighter vulnerable to attack, and the gauge can be increased in size performing tasks in a bonus stage. Critics cited that it was the CPU AI that was incredibly cheap, but the game was at a level of difficulty just too high for the average gamer. The visuals in the game are truly stunning. These huge, massive sprites are impressive, with an intricate amount of detail in them. Very well animated, and again, you see the damage on the fighter's face when taking hits. a trait that was now associated with the art of fighting games from this point on. You get the usual sprite scaling in and out in this game, and it is really smooth, especially when you see how much faster this game plays over the original. And the backgrounds are not left behind either. They all look huge to keep in scale with the size of the massive sprites, but the detail on them all is brilliant. They are not terribly well animated, but that isn't really important and doesn't affect the overall look of the game, which is impressive. The sound, as always on the Neo Geo, is just brilliant. The sound effects are loud, brash and powerful, especially when slamming onto the deck. I never had any qualms with this kind of sound effect, and when you are used to playing games on a Mega Drive and SNES, which had a lot weaker sounding slams, then these brash sounds on the Neo Geo were always welcome. It was kind of like an expression of just how powerful the console was. The music is good sounding, but some of the tunes are awful, with Lee's tune being a really annoying tune in my opinion, and most of the others being forgettable and bland. But overall, this was a well polished game by SNK. It wasn't a game I ever seen in the arcades. I think the first time I seen it, it was on Games World on Sky 1, and when seeing it play, it didn't look too different from the original. When I seen it second hand, for £28 in the summer of 1995, I had to pick it up. Very cheaply priced Neo Geo games had to be picked up. It was the law. When the game was released in 1994, it was £175. And here was me getting the game a year later for £28. And when you consider that the shop had to make a profit on the game as well, how much did they give some poor guy for it? Like £15 perhaps? Anyway, when I got it home, I was immediately struck by the difficulty of the game and was put off by it. But it was a 2-player mode that I played most. My mates didn't really enjoy playing me at Street Fighter 2, as I was pretty dangerous on that game. But a different versus fighting game meant we were all starting on the same level of experience, and that made the fighting more balanced. And I have to say, they were right. While Art of Fighting 2 is not as good as Street Fighter 2, playing it with my mates, it was as every bit as enjoyable, and it was most definitely worth the £28 asking price. And it was a game that was played on a regular basis with my mates, more often than not after a night's drinking at the local pub. And between this and Super Punch-Out on the SNES, there were many laughs on those nights. And speaking of laughs, there was always a joke or two when fighting John in Art of Fighting 2. When you defeat John, he falls down onto his knees and sticks his ass up in the air. In Glasgow, this was called the Glasgow Send-Off. And for those who maybe don't know, Glasgow can be a rough place, and we have 2 fighting moves named after this city. The Glasgow Kiss, which is a headbutt, and the Glasgow send-off, which places the victim in the same position as John here, and then they get a shotgun blast in the ass. But don't let that put you off visiting Glasgow. It's a vibrant and very friendly place. Art of Fighting 2 was a game that SNK sort of had to make really, as it fit neatly into a far bigger plan for them and their direction of where SNK versus fighters would go. And what I will say about it is this: give it a go if you are seriously into versus fighters. If you are a casual gamer, you will probably not like it all that much. And that was my look back at Art of Fighting 2. If you like this video, then please do give me a sub and a thumbs up, or maybe even a comment or two below about your memories of Art of Fighting 2. And a massive thank you to all of those who have subscribed to my channel and commented on my videos. Your feedback and support really does go a long way in helping the channel grow, and I do appreciate all of the comments and support. So it's a massive thank you from me. And that's all from me, folks. Thanks for watching.